The answer is
Fuck anarcho-capitalism.
seriously. At best, the attempt to marry anarchism and capitalism is a nonsensical contradiction, and at worst is the political equivalent of what would happen if Ayn Rand and Mussolini spawned a fedora-toting Austrian love child who happened to be born with a disease that it meant it couldn't go outside and so was forced to live its entire life confined to the bowels of online Reddit forums.
The U.S. sense is quite different. Here, every word has taken on the opposite of its meaning elsewhere. So here, libertarian means extreme advocate of total tyranny. That's what libertarian means here. It means power ought to be given into the hands of private, unaccountable tyrannies.
Oh, I guess we must just be like those people on social media who are always complaining that if someone doesn't agree with me on this thing or that thing, that they're not a real anarchist, huh?
Well, come on. We're not talking about quibbling over details. We're talking about politics that are the polar opposite of what we believe in. Anarchists are against the state and against capitalism. That's what makes us anarchists.
It is simply unfathomable to me how these people can just literally steal the word anarchist when they represent the opposite of it. They're not anarchists. They're frauds.
So, what is the real anarchy? There's a group of libertarians that would say that they know and subscribe to it. They go by many names: libertarian socialist, left libertarian, anarcho-communist, and others. This video is for any left libertarian YouTubers and their supporters, and it's meant to address and question the serious flaws of their philosophy. First, from the point of view of an anarcho-capitalist, government is an institution that systemizes the initiation of force. Simply, an anarcho-capitalist aims to bring that initiation of force down to zero by affirming property rights and encouraging voluntary interaction. On the other hand, the left libertarians are operating under different principles, where property and voluntary contracts have an asterisk by them with guidelines that must not be broken. The anarcho-communists also seem to have some different definition of government or the state, one that seems to be more nebulous. Now, it could be a misstep on my part, but the best thing that I could find is that the state is an unjustified hierarchical institution. But that term seems so vague, which brings up my first question, which is, what makes a hierarchy unjustified? What are the criteria? Is there some objective standard to what is a justified hierarchy? Or is it subjective and therefore dependent on the views of individuals or groups? To apply this question, let's use an example. Let's say there's a doctor, let's call him Dr. J, I guess, and Dr. J starts his medical practice out of a small office. After a few weeks of solely working the clinic by himself, Dr. J realizes that he spends too much time doing secretarial work and would be more effective in helping others if someone could take on that responsibility. So he decides to hire Connie, a college student who needs money to support herself. If I'm not mistaken, it would seem to anarcho-communists that Connie is being exploited because she's a quote-unquote wage slave, as ANCOMs like to call it. That is, Connie signed a contract with Dr. J that she gets paid a certain amount to help his business. Tangentially, I think it's important to remember that employees can actually benefit from not also being owners, as they would invariably have more responsibility and financial risk, which not everyone wants. So ANCOMs, how would we determine whether the hierarchy in the case of Dr. J and Connie is justified? If it is unjustified simply based on the fact that Dr. J owns the quote-unquote means of production, should Dr. J be expected to have this college student become co-owner for doing a low-skill job that is only meant to be temporary until she finishes school? If this hierarchy is illegitimate and it continues because both parties consent, then is it morally justifiable to use force to stop the hierarchy? Under an ANCOM perspective, it would seem so. Next, I want to talk about private property. ANCOMs assert that private property is illegitimate. However, personal property, on the other hand, is completely fine. What's the difference between personal and private property, you may ask? From my perspective, it seems like the difference between unjustified and justified hierarchies is basically because I said so. Now, let's look at a few explanations.
Personal property is property that one actually uses. Private property is property that generates profit. A house that you live in is personal property. A house that you rent to someone as a landlord is private property. A factory is private property. Your toothbrush is personal property.
Let's look at a Bad Mouse explanation. Bad Mouse says, it's worth pointing out the difference between private and personal property. Personal property is that which you personally own and interact with. Your home, car, clothes, trinkets, etc. Private property is that which you can claim sole restrictive rights to which you do not interact with. A factory, a store, hundreds of houses, an entire mountain, etc. Anarchists have no problems with the former. So the big difference seems to be whether there is an interaction with the property in question. Now this is confusing because this explanation seems to be simply arbitrary. Could I legitimately own a tuxedo that I wear every 6 months, but illegitimately own a store I interact with on a weekly basis? There seems to be some naivety that those who say own a store have some static interaction with it, when in reality starting up a business is extremely intensive, and usually only after that business owner puts in thousands of hours can they offset duties to others, which benefits those who can take work that didn't put in those hours that created that job in the first place. And just as a side note to those who might want to rebut this with naming all of the large corporations like McDonald's, Boeing, and others, they're largely that big thanks to corporate welfare, and that'll be discussed at another time. So back to Dr. J. Would his office be considered personal property even if he hires Connie, or would there be some sort of communal ownership where others can infringe on a space that he personally interacts with? All of these questions have had similar lines of reasoning, and that is, who decides what is an unjustified hierarchy or an unjustified property? It seems like individuals aren't graciously bestowed with the honor of deciding who they can associate with and in what manner. So is it fallacious to assert that it must be a group that does so for them? It doesn't seem so. And thus comes another million-dollar question. How is anything decided in these communities? As opposed to anarcho-capitalist societies that would welcome action as long as it doesn't initiate force, ANCOM societies want to organize as such. This quote is taken from the website theanarchistlibrary.org. In an anarchist society, this relationship is reversed. No one individual or group, elected or unelected, holds power in an anarchist community. Instead, decisions are made using direct democratic principles, and when required, the community can elect or appoint delegates to carry out these decisions. There is a clear distinction between policy making, which lies with everyone who's affected, and the coordination and administration of any adopted policy, which is the job for delegates. So if the group democratically decides policy, doesn't this infringe on individuals, meaning aren't they a state, as described at the very beginning of this rant? Even if it is direct democracy, that wouldn't stop people systemizing the initiation of force on individuals by deciding what property is theirs, taxing them for quote-unquote essential services, or dictating responsibilities as part of the collective. Unless a unanimous vote is required, which would then seem like almost nothing would get done anyways, how do the real anarchists explain this? And why is anarcho-capitalism looking a lot better? I look forward to hearing responses. Liberty out, but not gone.